Hi, so today we're going to talk about cellular energetics. What cellular energetics is really photosynthesis and respiration. So we're going to take a look at photosynthesis and respiration in this unit. But before we can actually take a look at those, we need to learn about a couple of information. We need to learn some information first that will help us, and we have to review some information that we studied in the past. So let's get started. Autotrophs and heterotrophs. We talked about autotrophs and heterotrophs when we talked about the flow of energy through an ecosystem. So let's just review. All living things need energy to survive. The main source of energy for life on Earth is the sun. Recall that plants and some other types of organisms are able to use the light energy from the sun to produce their own food. Those organisms are called autotrophs. Other organisms, such as animals and ourselves, cannot use the sun's light directly and need to obtain energy from the food they consume, and those organisms are called heterotrophs. To live, all organisms, both plants and animals, must release the energy in the food that they consume. So even though plants don't consume energy, they do make their own food, but they need to release the energy in the food that they produce in order to survive. So chemical energy and ATP. Just an overview on energy. Energy comes in many forms, including light, heat, and electricity. Energy can also be formed and stored in chemical compounds as well. An important chemical compound that cells use to store and release energy is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP is used by all types of cells as their basic energy source. Cells cannot use the food that we consume, so proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids, as their energy form. They're going to have to break those things down and convert it into a form of energy that the cell can use, and that form of energy that the cell can use is called ATP. So ATP consists of three parts. It's made of an adenine, it's made up of a 5-carbon sugar called ribose, and it's made up of 3 phosphate groups. You need to be able to identify the parts of an ATP molecule. So make sure you either sketch this or draw this out in your notes and have it there. So storing energy. ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, has 2 phosphate groups instead of 3. A cell can store small amounts of energy by adding a phosphate group to ADP. So you can kind of think of ADP as a partially charged battery. So when we add energy, we get ATP, which is our fully charged battery. In releasing energy, energy stored in ATP is released by breaking the chemical bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate groups. So here we have the adenine, the ribose, and our 3 phosphate groups, and we release energy from ATP by breaking the bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate groups, like so. So now we have ADP and a phosphate group that we've used to extract energy from. So the energy in ATP is needed for many cellular activities. It's needed in active transport. So we just finished our unit on cytology and transport across the membrane, and we saw that ATP was used in active transport. It's also used in the production of proteins, and it's also used in your muscles. So ATP's characteristics make it exceptionally useful as the basic energy source of all cells. Most cells have only a small amount of ATP because it's not a good way to store large amounts of energy. Glucose, or sugars, actually store 60 to 80 times more energy than ATP. But what's unique about ATP is that cells can regenerate ATP from ADP as needed by using the energy in foods like glucose. So the cells can actually regenerate ATP relatively quickly, even though it doesn't store a lot of energy compared to glucose. So let's talk photosynthesis. because we're going to find that ATP is involved in photosynthesis, and we're also going to see that it's involved in respiration. But let's talk photosynthesis first. It's the key cellular process identified with energy production, or the key cellular process identified with energy production is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process in which green plants use the energy of sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into high energy carbohydrates and oxygen. And those high energy carbohydrates are glucose, so make sure you write that down as well. The equation for photosynthesis, you must know this. Okay, so the equation for photosynthesis is as followed. You have 6 carbon dioxide molecules. So right here we've got our 6 carbon dioxide molecules. Then you've got 6 H2O molecules, or water molecules, and we use light energy to create our C6H12O6, and this is our sugar or our glucose, and 6 oxygen. You will need to know this balanced chemical equation for a quiz or a test. So as you can see there, the word equation, the carbon dioxide plus water and light energy is going to give us our sugars and our oxygen. So this is just another equation of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis has 2 parts to it. So there's the light-dependent reactions, which take place in the thylakoids. And there's the Calvin cycle, which takes place in the stroma. And we're going to take a closer look at each of those 2 reactions in the next presentation. But you've got the light-dependent reactions and the Calvin cycle. And you can see in the light-dependent reactions that the light-dependent reactions take in water, which is right here. The light-dependent reactions take in water. They use light from the sun, and the light-dependent reactions end up producing oxygen. It also ends up producing ATP and NADPH, which are energy carriers. And those energy carriers are used to fuel the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle uses carbon dioxide and oxygen right here. And it ends up producing, the Calvin cycle is what's responsible for producing our sugars. Once those energy carriers have dropped off their energy to fuel the Calvin cycle, the ADP and the NADP plus can go back to the light-dependent reactions and get recharged in order to complete this cycle. So lights and pigments. We can't talk about photosynthesis without both addressing lights and pigments. So what is the role of light and chlorophyll in photosynthesis? So in addition to water and carbon dioxide, photosynthesis requires light and chlorophyll. So we can't forget about those 2. Plants gather the sun's energy with light-absorbing molecules called pigments. The main pigment in plants is chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is what makes plants green or causes plants to be green. There are 2 main types of chlorophyll in plants. There's chlorophyll A and there's chlorophyll B. Let's take a closer look at chlorophyll. Chlorophyll absorbs light well in the blue, violet, and red regions of the visible spectrum. Recall that the visible spectrum is essentially the colors of the rainbow. So you've got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And we can see here on this graph that both chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, based on the peaks, is absorbed quite well in the blue-violet region and in the red region of the visible light spectrum. Chlorophyll, on the other hand, does not absorb light well in the green region of the spectrum. That's because green light is reflected by leaves, which is why plants look green. So anytime you're looking at something that's either green or blue or red, the reason why you are seeing that color is because that particular light is being reflected back at your eye. So leaves look green because the green light is being reflected back at our eye, as opposed to any of the other colors. So light is a form of energy, and so any compound that absorbs light is also responsible or also able to absorb energy from that light. When chlorophyll absorbs light, energy is transferred to the electrons in the chlorophyll. These high energy electrons are what make photosynthesis work. So photosynthesis would not take place if it wasn't for this pigment chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is responsible for capturing that energy from the light and getting those electrons excited. Then those excited electrons can then be used to help make our high energy sugars or our glucose. So just to review, you need to know that ATP is the main source of energy for cellular work. Okay, so the cells use ATP as their main form of energy. You need to know the three parts of ATP. You need to know that it's made up of an adenine, a ribose, and those three phosphate groups. You also need to know that it is reformed from ADP. So ADP, with the addition of a third phosphate, ends up making our ATP. You need to know the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So you need to know that photosynthesis has 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water, which is going to give us our C6H12O6 plus our 6O2. You also need to know that light is important for photosynthesis to take place. That's how we capture the energy. And then you also need to be familiar with pigments. You need to know that that main pigment in plants called chlorophyll is what's responsible for capturing that light energy and making it possible for photosynthesis to work. So best of luck, and I hope you took good notes.